أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما هذه الحياة الدنيا إلا لهوا ولعبا وإن دار الآخرة لهي الحيوان لو كنتم تعلمون صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات الله اللهم صل على محمد. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat as condolences to the master of our time, Sahib al-Asr wa Sallam. Respected Sayyidina, elders, brothers and sisters, my condolences to you again as we continue to commemorate the martyrdom of the mistress of the ladies of this world, Sayyidatun Nisa al-Alameen, Fatimatu Zahra, salamullahi alayhi. The discussion I want to have today centers around the premise of having what is a successful life. The reason this becomes a significant question is the society, the culture, the environment that we live in promotes for us a concept of what it means to have a successful life. A successful life in the country, the culture, the environment that we live in is promoted as something being one where you attain some great amount of wealth, or you attain some kind of fame, or you accomplish something that makes people respect you, or a combination of these various factors all coming together, that when you collect these attributes within yourself, you've had a successful life. We look at, for example, people who are incredibly wealthy. And what happens nowadays is the same way we have hadith al-a'imma, we have the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt. Society has the sayings and the teachings of the rich and wealthy. At any point in time, you can find a list online that 10 characteristics of very successful people. Or Steve Jobs used to do this, so you should do this if you want to be like Steve Jobs. And you ask somebody, why would you want to be like Steve Jobs? And they say, Baba, he was successful, he had money, he had fame, iPhone, hello, where have you been living, under a rock or something? iWatch, whatever, the watch, come on, he recreated something, the pencil, and it became famous again, that, oh, he made a pencil. And they say we want to see his example and follow that we should attain the same kind of success in life. So the implication society taught was that to be wealthy was to be successful. Then you look at sports figures, and we started to emulate their characteristics. Kobe used to work out like this, so you work out like this. Kobe used to do this, you do this. LeBron James used to play or does this before he plays, you do this. We looked at these sports characteristics and we saw what were their ideals, how did they live, and we said that's a successful person in life. And we said we want to emulate that individual, we want to follow that person's example and become like them, and then we will become successful if we are like that. There's this guy, Vaynerchuk or something to that effect, who puts out these videos and he tells you how he became rich. He says, you want to be like me, this is how you should do it. Then there's another guy who's wealthy. He says, I never paid for a cup of coffee. I only make it in my house. So people said, oh, he became rich. He never bought coffee. I won't buy coffee. I'll make it in my house. It's 30 cents a cup versus $3. Why am I going to pay for a cup of coffee? I'm going to do. What we found was society has been teaching and educating this system. A successful life is a life of wealth, is a life of fame. And what we've been doing as a community, and not specifically us, but as a general community, we've been emulating those practices and integrating them into our lifestyle. Where now when we sit with that rich and famous person, we don't ask, how did you become so wealthy? We say, what do you recommend I do so I become wealthy and I become famous and I become successful? What was your major in college? Oh, you didn't go to college? I won't go to college. We became people who wanted to grasp this concept of what it is to be successful, and we started to follow it and look for it in life and society. But here's the problem. If this is our standard of success, how much money I have, how famous I am, how many people follow me on Twitter, what's my Snapchat reach? These measures of success, I have a problem. I have a problem with the other traditional format of success, right? Success in our parents' time was different as well too. That was to be able to pay your bills, to have a nice house, to have lots of children, to not have to worry about expenses. If you got to this level, you were successful. Did good in life, especially if you came from overseas. And we know, and it's true, it was very difficult, that people, when they came with nothing. They didn't speak the language. They didn't have any relatives. They sacrificed a lot. And they said, my goal is going to be, when I have my own house, when I have my business, I can pay my bills, my children will go to college. This will be my measure of success. Here's the problem. How old was Sayyidah Zahra when she passed away? Anybody know? 18. Do you know why it's important for everybody to know that number? There's a few reasons. First off, it's important to know this number is that when we sit and we commemorate this majlis of shahadat of Sayyidah Zahra, that the fact that she passed away at 18 flies in the face of what popular history tells us. Popular history, what they try to do is they try to paint a different picture of what happened with Sayyidah Zahra because they have to hide something. So she was 30, 40. She passed away in childbirth complications. She died a natural death. But when we gather here and we discuss this affair and we make it a point to address the fact that this was someone who was oppressed and martyred, who was killed at the age of 18, it tells the fact that that wasn't a natural death. Something happened. An 18-year-old woman does not die and pass away the way Sayyidah Zahra did. That it informs people that they need to ask the question, what happened in history to the daughter of the Holy Prophet that she did not have a long life? What changed in history? Who or what took place at that point in time that took this personality away at such a young age that was unnatural? We don't need to go and yell at people and curse at people and tell them that they're wrong. Just present the facts of history. Let them go ask the question of why. Instead of them reading popular history, if they were to say that these Shia, these Jaffari, they believe that she passed away at 18, does it say anywhere in history that she passed away at 18? Let them go look for it. And when they look for it, they'll find the narratives of truth. That's all we have to do. We don't have to tell them Fulan was like this, and so was like this, and so was Mal'oon, and this was that. Just tell them history. Let them see for themselves. Let them go and question. But if we don't make it a practice to sit and discuss and make it an event that this occurs in history, that this is something that was significant that happened, nobody's going to care. The same way, take a look and see how the narrative of Ashura has changed the public opinion of those personalities. Now there is no one in this world who can look at the event of Karbala and say that Yazid was a good man, Mal'oon. Why? Because we made it a narrative about the character of Aba Abdullah. We made it a narrative about the beauty and the knowledge of this personality that they went and questioned themselves. How is it possible for one who said such beautiful things, who spent his nights in ibadat, who gave us dua of Arafah, to have been killed? And they came to the conclusion themselves that they said something was wrong here in history. We've been told a lie. And the same we need to do around Sayyidah Zahra, that we introduce the personality and introduce the facts of history. Let them figure it out. Not my problem. I need to make sure I know history. So that's one problem. That if we don't know she passed away at 18, then how can we be the ones who educate and bring the truth out as an example? The second point that we have is if we take a look at, for example, the fact that Sayyidah Zahra passed away at 18, and she was not incredibly wealthy, and she was not incredibly famous for her time, did she not have a successful life? Oh, if we start looking like that, all of the Ayyam, not necessarily incredibly wealthy, they were not incredibly famous, were they successful in life? The point I'm trying to make is when we take a look at the idea of a successful life, it can't be something that only incorporates wealth and fame. Because if that was the measure of success, our Ayyamah never focused on this. They never spent their time chasing after these concepts of wealth and fame. So that tells me that wealth and fame may be something I can attain in life, but it should not be how I measure, do I have a successful life or not? And this is why when we look, for example, in the verse that we began our discussion with, Allah is saying that this life is nothing but a mirage, a distraction and a plaything. The real life is in the hereafter, if you only understood. The point of this verse is to say is that, hey, listen, materialism that you see in this world is a distraction. It's not the real goal that you have to attain. If you want to understand how to have a successful life, you have to go back and look at people who were the example of a successful life. You have to find personalities who succeeded in life, and from there you can understand what do you need to achieve with this life. Now, to back into this question of what it means to have a successful life, or what is a successful life, the first thing we have to understand is what is life. Okay, we're not going to get too philosophical, okay? Stay awake, stay with me. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. We want to understand, one, what is a human being? What are the faculties at play in the creation of a human being? Understanding what it is that Allah has created in a human being. Then we want to take a look at how do we now manipulate the faculties of a human being. And three, talk about what it is when we see success in the manipulation of the faculties of a human being. So in our first part, we talk about what is a human being. A human being is consistent of two separate entities in one body. One is that physical presence of a human body, the human body itself, the mass, the size, the shape, the color, the texture, the speech, the brain. All of these faculties collected are one half of a human being. The other half of a human being is the spirit. The spirit, now when you take a look at it, there's no specific part in my body that, for example, there's a pocket here where my spirit exists. There's no part of my body that I can say the spirit doesn't exist in this finger. As long as a piece of this physical entity is attached to me, it contains a spirit. When we look at, for example, a human body that's alive and a human body that's deceased, the weight is the same, the color is the same, the size is the shape, everything is the same. But all of a sudden, one moment we're addressing this as a person. We're speaking to, for example, Bob. Bob is a fairly innocuous name. There's nobody here named Bob, right? We're not talking about killing anybody in the community here. Bob is here. I'm talking to Bob. Bob exists. Why? He's Bob because he's a composite of both of these entities, a spirit and a body. When these two come together, he's Bob. Bob. But as soon as he dies and that spirit leaves that body and there's a separation that exists between these two, we don't call him Bob anymore. We call him the body. The body's here. The body needs to be picked up. We talk about Bob in the past tense now. Bob was a great guy. Bob had really nice hair. Bob played very good chess. Everything becomes past tense as soon as these two entities separated. Meaning that a human being is not simply something that exists in a physical form. It has another personality and aspect to it that we have to acknowledge, the spirit. And once those two are separated, the physical form has no value. As a matter of fact, it becomes impure. It becomes najis. If I touch it, I am in a state of spiritual impurity. So when we take a look at these two entities, there's something very interesting. Allah describes these two entities in a human body in separate terminology and description. When it comes to the physical body, Allah says, we took you from a cell, a germ. Then we made you into a clot. Then we made that clot into some cells. Then we stretched it over bone. Then we gave skin to it. And then we gave it a physical. Allah describes the physical development of a human being in the Quran from the moment of conception to the creation of a human being. All physical form. The beauty of the physical form and what's a reality when it comes to the physical form, Allah has given us the physical form and the material presence so that we can recognize His signs. The difference between Islam and Christianity when it comes to creationism is, Christianity believes that creationism is such a thing that it's a miracle of God that we should never ask any questions about. We're not allowed. For example, when we talk about the creation of the earth and creationism and biblical creationism, there's a problem that we have with it that they say 5,000 years ago, the earth did not exist, and then all of a sudden it came into existence. When a scientist hears this, he says, but these dinosaur bones in the ground are millions of years old. And the Christian says, shh, no. That's God testing us to see if we really have faith in Him or not. And a scientist comes and he says, that makes no sense. How is that possible? And he says, religion is only trying to fool me from the reality that exists in the earth. Islamic creationism is different. Islamic creationism says Allah has put these signs for you. Allah is telling you, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. That I have put signs in the creation of the heavens and the earth. I have put signs in the changing of day and night so that you recognize me. You come to see that I am your creator. You see the intellectual design that exists in this world, and you come closer to me and you appreciate me. So when it comes to the material creation of a human being, the body and how the body is made and the science and the DNA and all these things, Allah says, look at the beauty in this creation and recognize that I am your creator. Look at how beautifully I crafted this human being. Look at how I gave him these features that I even taught you can manipulate them. You can change the eye color, you can change the hair, you can do different things to the body to make it more capable for sport, for example, or more intellectually sound by developing its various faculties. Allah says when it comes to the human body, the signs are there for you. Use it and interact with it. Do with it what you want. But now look at the other side. When it comes to the spirit, in the Quran it says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ. When they ask you about the spirit, قُلِ الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِ وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. Then it says that, O Rasulullah, when they come to you and they ask you about the spirit, tell them the spirit is from the command of Allah. That I command it to be and it exists. وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. And you don't know anything about it. You don't have much except what I tell you. The spirit, when we look at the command of Allah, إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُ إِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أَن يَقُولَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. Allah tells you, when it comes to my command, in Surah Yasin, the famous verse we all recited, Allah says, when it comes to my command about something that exists, if I want to command something to exist, I say be, and it is. But notice, He didn't say this about the body. He called the body khalq, creation, and He said you can see my signs of creation. But when it comes to the spirit, Allah says you don't know anything about it, which is why with our senses can we sense a spirit? Can we see it? Can we hear it? Can we smell it? Can we touch it? Can you taste the spirit? Sure, ours might taste like biryani, right? No, you can't, because that's from the command of Allah. You don't have the ability to interact with it except in the way that He dictates to you. So now when we understand a human being has these two entities within himself, he has a physical presence, one that can be manipulated, can be modified. I can weigh more, I can weigh less. I can be more intelligent, I can be less intelligent. I can be someone who has great dexterity with the cup thing that they do, right? They take the cups and they pile them up and bring them down. I can use my dexterity and I can develop this skill within myself. I can do all of these things that manipulate me as a human being on a physical sense. But when it comes to my spirit, can I change the clothes on my spirit? Can I change the size of my spirit? I can't manipulate this except by the way that Allah dictates for me. So now when we want to understand, let's go back to our question. How does a human being have a successful life? Let me ask you, is it possible for a human being who consists of a physical presence and a spiritual presence to be successful in life and never understand, work with, develop, purify his spirit? He only works on his body. He only works on this world. It's impossible. We would say that the person who only spent his life working on his body and working on his material possessions didn't understand an entire side of his personality. He didn't understand an entire side of his existence because he couldn't manipulate it. He never learned about it. Now I want you to think about this, right? How to explain it to you in this way. We say, Imam Ali ibn al-Hussain Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, Muhammad, he says, for a disbeliever when he dies, it's as if he's taken off his clean clothing and put himself into chains. He's put himself into chains and he is now in filth and in chains and difficulty. He says, for a mu'min, when he dies, it's as if he's cast off his dirty garments and his chains and he's put on clean clothing and he is now perfumed and beautified. If we wanted to simplify this hadith and apply it to our conversation, we would say this. We would say that that disbeliever who never worked on his soul, who never developed his spiritual entity, his strongest part of that individual was his physical body. As soon as that physical body died, that physical presence was broken and Allah removed the soul, he had never done anything for his soul. He was malnourished spiritually. So therefore, as soon as his soul left his body, he was in a state of pain and discomfort and filth and unease because he had never worked on his soul. And the mu'min, whose soul, in spirit, he developed in this life and he worked on purifying his spirit and worked on developing his characteristics. As soon as he dies, for him, his soul is strong. His soul was something that was being restricted by the physical body, that now Allah removed the restriction of the physical body and the spirit became powerful. And its true power was unleashed. This is what the Imam is describing. Think about it yourself. How is this possible? Let me ask you something. When I say, for example, I heard with my ear, what's hearing? I saw with my eyes, what's seeing? I thought to myself, or I used my brain and I thought about, I used my brain. Look at it, the signs are in the language that we know. Our spirit is what's listening with our body. Our spirit is what's seeing with our eyes. Our spirit is what's thinking with our brains. We acknowledge this, but we don't think about it. We don't spend time to realize of how this human being is a composite of these two items. Now, let me bring it back one more level. And let's start putting this into context about how to have a successful life. There's a narration that comes, and we started to mention it yesterday, of one of the wives of the Prophet who says, I was sitting with the Holy Prophet when Sayyidah Zahra came into the house. I saw that Rasulullah, when Sayyidah Zahra would enter, he would stand up from his spot, he would kiss her and sit her in his own seat. So I turned to him and I said, Ya Rasulullah, Fatima is no longer a child. She's a grown woman. Don't you exceed the bounds of respecting her by sitting her in your own place? She's a woman. You don't do that for men. You're going to do that for a woman? And we went into one explanation yesterday. Today, now we continue with this narration. Rasulullah replied, he said, understand something. When I went in Mi'raj to the heavens, my brother Jibreel fed me an apple. This is from Sunni sources. This is not a Shia hadith. The Shia narration is even more weighty than this one. My brother Jibreel fed me an apple from the fruit of heaven. When I ate that apple and I came back from Mi'raj to this earth, I went to see Khadija, and from that, Fatima was born to me. Fatima is from the fruit of heaven, which is why whenever I miss heaven, I kiss the neck of Fatima and I remember the smell of heaven. Salawat ala Muhammad wa Yani, the point Rasulullah is making is that the spirit of Fatima was something Allah kept reserved in heaven until it was the time for Sayyidah Zahra to be born. And then He gave Rasulullah the spirit of Fatima to bring into this world. We have a number of narrations that talk about this, that for example, when our Holy Prophet talked about it, he said, Ali and I were in the backbone of Adam together from the creation of Adam until our grandfather. He never says the nur of Sayyidah Zahra was in the backbone of Adam. The nur of Sayyidah Zahra was something separate. So the question that comes is, why was it necessary for the spirit of Sayyidah Zahra to be kept separate from the rest of humanity? And this goes back to the next question of understanding how this spirit operates. You see, everything you do as a human being has an impact. Sometimes a physical action has an impact on our spirit, and sometimes a spiritual action has an impact, or spiritual condition has an impact on our body. Let me give you an example. When you're scared, fear is a spiritual state. Why? It manifests, it shows itself in a human being differently. Some people, for example, when they're scared, they pass out. Some people, their body begins to shake. Some people, their skin changes color. Some people begin to laugh uncontrollably. I have like these videos of this little girl who they're about to give a shot and she's just sitting there laughing. She's scared. But the manifestation of that fear is through that laughing. What that's telling you is because the physical characteristic is different each time, that this is a spiritual action, that she's scared and physically it manifests itself differently. The same way there are certain physical conditions that manifest themselves differently spiritually. For example, when I go through a great state of illness, sometimes my spirit feels down, I don't feel like praying, I don't feel like acting. I change my behavior. Meaning what? When I have the flu, I'm not such a nice guy. I'm always a nice guy though. Well, we know people, when they physically don't get enough sleep, what happens? Their personality changes, they become cranky. And Ramadan comes, there are those people who when they don't eat, what happens to their personality? It changes. That's a physical condition that's affecting my spirit. The same way there are certain spiritual conditions that can affect my body. One of the examples that we see this is we see the narration of our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a very weighty hadith, but he says, one who marries his daughter to an alcoholic or a person who drinks alcohol has broken the relationships of the womb with her. He has done qat'i raham with her. We would say that the consumption of alcohol is a physical activity, something you do with your body. Silai raham, the relationships of the womb, are a spiritual connection between two people. But Allah is teaching, He says, because you did this physical action, it had a spiritual impact. It had a negative spiritual impact on you. Now don't do this action. The same way we see in other narrations when we talk about Sila Rahim, one who breaks family relations with his family, with his relatives, Allah shortens his life, reduces his rizq, takes away his barakah. Baba, my life is a physical characteristic. My wealth is a physical characteristic. What does the relationship of the womb have to do with all of these different things? Allah is teaching you that physical activities have an act on the spirit and spiritual activities have an impact on the physical body. That the reason that this personality of Sayyida Zahra was kept in heaven was to protect her spirit from the impurities that could exist within humanity, that when she is sent to this earth, she is tahira mutahhira, that is the spring of purity for the 11 imams that will come from her lineage. Salawat alayhi. There is a spiritual impact to this. This is another reason why Rasulullah explained, تُخَيِّرُ لِنُطِفِكُمْ لِأَنَّ الْإِرْقَ دَسَّاسٌ. That be careful who you select as a spouse for yourselves. Because certainly the genes, the spirituality, the characteristics before will play an impact in your next generation, your going forward generation. Otherwise, all we had to care about was picking the most handsome or the most beautiful spouse, and that's all we care about. No, their character, their personality, their demeanor, the environment they were raised in, all play factors in who they are as a person. Allah, He wanted the Ayyam to come from purity, so He protected and preserved the nur of Sayyida Zahra, the spirit of Sayyida Zahra, until it was time to come to this earth, so that there would be no question about the isma and the tahara of those 11 sons of hers. Now, we understand a couple of things. We've gotten through a few of these points. One, we understand what is a human being. Two, that these two elements play amongst themselves. Three, it's significant that we protect the element of our spirit and we pay attention to the element of our spirit, and that through the example of Sayyida Zahra, we see the necessity and the importance of the purity of that spirit, that when Allah wanted to keep a spirit pure, He separated it from all the other filth on this earth. So now the question comes when it applies to you and I. My nur was not in heaven. My spirit didn't come from heaven. I'm someone who lives on this earth. How do I go about manipulating my spirit? Let's say I want to have a successful life, and everybody does want to have a successful life. I want to be successful in this world. The one aspect, the material, right? I can listen to Steve Jobs, I can listen to Vaynerchuk, I can listen to all these other guys who are very wealthy, and I can listen to their ideas, and I can understand my material possessions. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a very important concept to understand. There's no problem with having material wealth. As a matter of fact, it's good. Our Ayyam used to teach us that we want our mu'mineen to be the best in every environment they sit. Be the best at whatever it is that you decide to do. There should be no one better than you. If you are someone who sits in, for example, a professional field, you should be the best in that professional field. If you are someone who is a consultant, you should be the best consultant. If you're a doctor, be the best. And part of being the best is, yes, making money as you do it. Earning a halal living. Living a good lifestyle. These are very recommended to do. That's great, but it should not be done at the expense that I forget I have a spiritual presence and I don't develop my spirituality. I have to balance these two sides in an equation. And before we even get further, the question is what happens if I sacrifice my spiritual self for my physical self? Say for my physical success, I sacrifice my spiritual success. Let me give you a short story to put this into perspective, but you're with me, right? Nobody's falling asleep yet? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In the time of Bani Israel, there was a husband and wife, and they were pious people. They were spiritual people. They were people who Allah was pleased with. But they were very, very, very poor. They were so poor that they had debts on their names, and they were constantly, both of them were constantly working just to keep their head above water, meaning that they pay their debts a little bit and they eat a little bit, but they can't live comfortably, meaning they were the kinds of people who couldn't buy an iPhone when it came out every year because they didn't have enough. They were just trying to get by. They got tired of living this difficult life. They got tired of living this day-to-day life and just struggling to keep their head above water. So they decided, they said, this Thursday night, because Thursday night is a very important night. Allah says, I send down the malaika to the lowest heaven to call out, is there anyone who has a need that they should ask their Lord for it? Let me answer it tonight. Is there anyone who is seeking forgiveness? Ask me tonight and I will give it to you. Even when we take a look at history, we take a look at Nabi Yaqub, when his 11 sons realized the mistake that they had done with Yusuf, and they said, Father, ask Allah for our forgiveness. Nabi Yaqub says, I will ask for you at a later time. Nabi Yaqub waits for Thursday night to ask for forgiveness for his sons. So this couple from the Bani Israel, they say, this Thursday night we're going to do some special a'mal. And we're going to ask Allah to give us wealth to solve our problems. We don't want a lot. We just want to pay off our debts so that we can live free of debt in our life. Thursday night comes, and the wife, she goes inside of her house, and the husband goes out into the field. When you have a desire for istijabat al-du'a, the masjid of the woman is inside the most secluded and private place in her house where she won't be disturbed. And for a man, the best place to be is out under the open sky to make dua under the open sky of Allah and ask Allah for his needs. So sure enough, the woman went to the secluded place in her house to make dua, and the man went out into the fields and he made his dua. They had discussed the a'mal, and they went and they performed their a'mal. When they finished, the man on his way back in the middle of the darkness saw something thud that fell near him. And he was in the middle of the wilderness, nothing was nearby, so he looked around to see where did it come from. He couldn't figure it out. He went over to look at it and he found a giant gem. He called, nobody answered, nobody's nearby. He knows it couldn't have come from anywhere. He says, maybe this is the istijabat of my dua. So he picks up the gem, put it inside of his cloth, goes home. He goes home and he tells his wife, in this way I did these amal, and sure enough, bling, here's the gem. So the two of them, they become happy. They said, this is more than enough money. If we sell this, we'll have enough money to pay off our debts and we'll have the good life. So they say, okay, they go to sleep and they plan the next morning, they're going to go to such and such shop, sell the jewel, take the money, pay their debts, and they're done. That night they have a dream. In this dream, they're in Roze Mahshar, the day of judgment, and they're going through the questioning. And as they go through the questioning, and the day of judgment when itself is a description of how you go through it, but when they go to the first stage of questioning, they're told they are amongst the pious people, they are amongst the good people. Said, you are entered into heaven, go. So as they go by each of the stages of the day of judgment, they keep showing and they say, we've received our approval, our a'mal are accepted, Allah has given us permission, and they go to heaven. They go to the gate of heaven, they show their approval, the concierge comes, says, welcome, we've been waiting for you. Takes these two people, takes them into heaven, takes them to their various neighborhood in heaven, takes them to the various street that they're going to live on, and the entire time the two people, their mouths are like, astounded. How can you imagine the beauty of what Allah has created in heaven? And they're fascinated by it. They go in their house, they start taking a look around, beautiful house, fantastic house. Eventually, they go to the master bedroom. You know, when you buy a house, the most special place that they create in the house is where? Master bedroom. Yeah, that's where, you know, the owner of the house is going to live. You want it to be nice. They go, they look at this master bedroom and they see there's a hole in the ceiling. So they call up the concierge, the angel comes and they say, there's a problem. He says, this is heaven, there's no problems here. There's no problems here, this is heaven. They say, no, but listen, our house, inside of our house, inside the bedroom, inside the master bedroom, there's a hole in the ceiling. I think someone made a mistake in construction. Again, the angel said, you don't understand. This is heaven. There's no mistakes here. He says, maybe there was something that you had entitled here that you took sooner. There was some barakah that was meant for you here that you took sooner. And they go and they take a look at the hole and they see it's the size of the gem. They wake up, morning comes, Husband looks at wife, wife looks at husband. Go about their day, sit down to breakfast. Did you have any interesting dreams? Yeah. Did you? Yeah. And they go and they rehash what they saw in their dream, and they realize, and they said, what we did was, there was some physical element here that was troubling us, and we asked Allah to give it. But in place of that physical element, Allah had reserved something great for us. We took that benefit now, as opposed to taking it later. And then they thought, is it better for us to live this life with some difficulty, if the benefit in Akhirah, where that mansion is permanent, that house is perfect, that place is beautiful, that place should be perfect and I suffer a little bit here? And they came to the conclusion that, yeah, we'll live with debt. We'll live in difficulty here. As long as in Akhirah we get that room with the full ceiling, we don't want any gaps in the roof. So they went to the Nabi of the time and they said, hey, listen, we have this big piece of bling here, and we don't want to keep it here. We want it in Akhirah where it was meant to be. They told him the whole story, and the Nabi said, the easiest way to take something from this world and send it to the next world is give it away in charity. That giving of charity is something that will take whatever it is in this world and present it to the next world and put it back where it goes. So it's like your 401k. What do we do with a 401k? A 401k is something that we have, that today I take the income I'm earning today and I put it aside to save for tomorrow when I won't have this income. When I retire and I want money, I put it there. Charity is the 401k of the Akhirah. That what you do today is I give away something that I have today of my material possession, of my material desires, of something that I need and want. What is that telling you? First off, it's telling you that sadaqah is not the loose change in my pocket. Loose change in my pocket is no impact to me. I go through no difficulty by getting rid of that loose change in my pocket. That's why I give it away, is because it doesn't bother me. Sadaqah, the true sadaqah that's going to help me in Akhirah and is going to change me and give me the spiritual benefit, is that sadaqah when I make a sacrifice of my material possession for my Akhirah. I have one more beautiful example for you from our 8th Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida alayhi salam. The beauty of sharing these with you is to understand something. When we're talking about the balance between a physical human being and a spiritual human being, the aspect is don't always focus on the satisfaction of the physical desire. Those physical things, they have a composite of the spiritual when we go through that difficulty. In this way, there was a man from the villages of Iran who wanted to go to the ziyarah of Imam Ali ibn Musa. When he wanted to go, he went to the alim in the community, much like we would do here, and he said, Sayyidina, I want to go for ziyarah. Will you take me? And Sayyidina said, sure, I'll take you. This villager didn't know what to do. So he takes his Sayyid, the Imam of his community, and he takes him for the ziyarat of Imam Rida. And whatever the Sayyid does, much the same way we would do, the villager follows. He sees him recite Izn Dukhul, he recites it. He sees him recite the ziyarah, he recites it. He sees him recite the 2 rakat namaz. Eventually he follows him and goes to the zari. And he sees his Sayyid standing there, saying his salam, and all of a sudden, he sees his Sayyid say something 3 times. Namikha, I don't want. And he repeats it a 2nd time, a 3rd time. Now this villager, he says, okay, Sayyid comes to the zari of Imam Raza and says, I don't want. Is that what I should do? So when he finishes his ziyarat, he goes outside. He says, Sayyid, I saw you do something I didn't understand. I was doing everything you did until you went to Imam Raza and you said, I don't want. The Sayyid says, I'll tell you some other time, let's go. And he takes this man home, and this old man says, he writes this in his story, he says, eventually when the Sayyid was about to pass, I went to visit him again and I asked him, Sayyid, you told me you would eventually tell me, what was it that you did when you went to Imam Raza and you said, I don't want? Who goes to Imam Raza and says, I don't want? He says, the Sayyid said, now I'm about to leave this world, so I'll tell you. He says, when I went to the dhari of Imam Raza, I saw Imam Raza in front of me. And I began my conversation with him directly. I said salam to him, he replied to me. Then I asked him for my hajat. The Sayyid says, in my hajat, what I wanted was, I had this sickness in my hand. And I said to Imam Raza, Imam Raza, I have this sickness, I have this problem. And because of this problem, whenever I do wuzu, sometimes my wuzu breaks because some blood comes out of it. I have some difficulty with this. It's difficult for me to maintain my wudu and to perform my ibadat. It's complicated. Imam Raza, will you make this go away from me? Will you ask Allah to give me shafa'ah and take this sickness away from me? He says, when I asked Imam Raza this question, Imam Raza turned to me and he said, "Oh Sayyid, Allah has given you this sickness. And in exchange of this sickness, and you're suffering with this difficulty and this physical ailment, Allah has given you a very lofty place in heaven for your patience with these difficulties you are suffering. But because you have come to me, and you have asked by my wasila, if I ask Allah to remove this sickness, He'll remove it. Do you want me to remove this sickness?" The Sayyid said, "This is the point that I decided." I said, "No, I don't want to remove this sickness. I don't want it." Imam Rada asked me a second time, "Are you sure? If I ask Allah now, by tomorrow, by now, right now, that sickness will remove itself?" And again I said, "No, I'd rather have the sickness now and goodness and what Allah has reserved for me in akhirah." And the third time he asked me, the third time again, I said, "No, I'll take the sickness now for the goodness in akhirah." You see, we're not going to complete the entire conversation, but the point of this conversation is that yes, material success is good. Material happiness is good. Physical success is good. But there are times in our lives when we see challenges or we are incapable of attaining those qualities. It doesn't mean that we don't get a spiritual benefit for the trials that we are going through. So now the question is how do I then develop that spirituality without the exam? I don't want Allah to constantly be testing me. One aspect that we do for our spiritual development is khulus al-niyyah. To have a pure intention when we perform our acts and our acts of worship and even the acts of dunya that we do. And it's very difficult. When someone doesn't acknowledge a good thing that we do, we get very frustrated. They didn't even appreciate it. I gave a lecture for so long. I became so tired. No one said thank you. No one said good job. Did I recite the lecture for you or did I recite it for Allah? If I recited for Allah, why do I care if people said thank you? It's like the story of the man. This young boy, he goes into a masjid to pray. And this is we have to cut down the stories. We're running out of time. He goes into a masjid to pray and all these old men who are sitting there saying, "MashaAllah, look at him. He's praying and he's praying so well and he's a young boy and he's praying like this." The young boy, when he finishes his prayer, he turns to me and he says, "And if you didn't know, I'm fasting too." He changed his ibadah from the worship of Allah to the praise of the people. That when they were praising his prayer, he said, "Hey, praise me for the fact I'm fasting too." That khulus an-niyyah, that our intention is for the sake of Allah. Forget when people don't appreciate your actions. Forget when people don't acknowledge the goodness that you do. Make sure whatever it is that I'm doing and I'm trying to achieve is only for the sake of Allah. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. That intention that we have is an acknowledgement that the goodness that I perform is for the sake of Allah. That good thing that I do is for the sake of Allah. Another very practical point that we mention about the idea of improving your spirituality and overcoming the desires of the world comes from the life of Sayyidah Fatima az-Zahra, salamullahi alayha. Amir al-Mu'mineen narrates, he says, "I came home one day and I found that the chores of the household were very difficult on Fatima. That from carrying the water, there had become a mark on her shoulder, a bruise on her shoulder from the weight of the water skin. From the sweeping of the floors, her clothes were constantly filled with dust and dirt. And from the grinding of the wheat to make the bread, her hands had become calloused and rough. So I said to her, 'Daughter of Rasulullah, your father is assigning servants, a khadim or khadima, to help the mu'mineen in their houses. Why don't you go and ask your father for him to assign a khadima, a servant who would come to your house and assist you in these tasks?' They're difficult. So he says the next day Sayyidah Zahra went to the masjid, went to go visit her father. She found Rasulullah sitting with many people. And from a distance she became embarrassed to ask her father for a material need when he was busy with the affairs of the Muslimin. So she left and she came home without asking for anything. That night, as we prepared for sleep, Rasulullah came to visit us. When he came to visit us, he said, Fatima, you came to me today to ask me for something. What did you want? In this way, Sayyidah Zahra said, I heard that you were assisting the mu'mineen by assigning servants to them to assist them in their house. I was hoping that you could assign someone to assist us in the house. Rasulullah says, oh Fatima, shall I give you something that is much better for you than to have a servant in your house? Sayyidah Zahra said, yes, please. He says, this is a gift from Allah that He has given for you, that when you complete your prayers, to recite this tasbih. 34 times Allahu Akbar, 33 times Alhamdulillah, 33 times. Thank you, very good, okay. Imam Sadiq explains, he says, had there been anything better in existence, Allah would have gifted it to the daughter of Rasulullah in that instance, rather than give her this. You see, when we recite salah, we sometimes get confused when we finish our prayers and we finish our namaz. What's the right ta'qibat to perform? What are the right du'as to recite? Which one should I recite? Which one? There's so many du'as. This story, this nuskha is telling you that if there is an action that should be accompanied with your prayer, there is nothing better for you in existence to pair your salat with than this tasbih of Sayyidah Zahra salamullahi alayha. Our sixth Imam used to say, he said, we teach our children to recite tasbihatul Zahra the way you teach your children to pray. Meaning that, the same way at the age of 7 we start telling our children to begin the process of praying, Imam is saying that at that age we're teaching our children to don't leave this tasbih. That there is such barakat in this tasbih that when you pair this tasbih with your salah, that you put this tasbih with your salah, there is nothing at the end of this tasbih that you ask for that it would be strange that Allah should give you. That you open the doors of spiritual connection by pairing this tasbih with your salah. Our goal as a lesson from Sayyidah Zahra is that when we recite our salat, we pair this for our spiritual development. In terms of spiritual development, inshallah we'll continue this slightly tomorrow as well too. There are many different activities, but one of the basic fundamentals is that we take the time to give importance to this prayer. When Allah says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحِ مِنْ عَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. That if there is a way to manipulate the spirit, the only way you're going to learn it is from what Allah teaches you. Otherwise, you'll never have an idea of how to successfully manipulate it. So Allah, when He teaches you how to manipulate your spirit, He gives you this manual. It's called Islam. And He says, through these physical activities, you will manipulate and develop your spirit. The most basic of those items, the fundamental, Amud ad-Din, is salat. That's the acknowledgement. That's the basic nourishment of your soul. It's the acknowledgement that I have a soul and that this physical activity of prayer will have an impact on my spirit. And the more we purify and the more we work on this prayer, the more we work on the development of our spiritual self and our awareness. But back to the point where Imam Sadiq says, that we teach our children this tasbih the way you teach your children to pray. There's another statement my Imam made. He said, we teach our children to remember and learn khutbah fadaqiyah. Now there is no child in our house who does not know the words of Fatima Zahra when she went to go ask for her right. When Sayyidah Zahra says, Subbat alayya al-masa'ib, that difficulties were poured on me, such that if they were poured on days, sirna layali, that those days would have become night. Let me tell you, the worst injustice done to Zahra was not the event of the door, was not the murder of her child, was when she went and sat next to the grave of her father, and she says, Baba, they called me a liar. They belied me and they said I was a liar. I am your daughter. I am Siddiqat al-Kubra. But when I went and I asked for my right, and I came and I said that after the death of my father, they violated my sanctity, they said I was a liar. There is no greater injustice done to Zahra than the one who is the daughter of Ma'asuma, who is the most pure, was called a liar in front of the people. In such a way, they said, listen and read this khutbah fadakiyah. If it is the inheritance of the Ma'sumin that they said we teach our children the words of our mother Zahra, then we as the Shia should at least know the words of our mother Zahra. It begins with a simple phrase that Sayyida Zahra left her house in the market. They said we saw her walk with such anger and frustration. Her chadar would come under her feet as she marched to the haram. Let me ask you, was the chadar under her feet because of her anger or because of the wounds on her body that she had sustained? They say this Sayyidah, when she came to the haram, she came by the grave of her father. All of the community had collected. They said, we had never seen Fatima come like this. We wanted to see what she said. I will only tell you this first phrase. They said, we sat and we gathered, and she sat by the grave of her father. She let out one sigh. And that one sigh, that one anguished cry that came from this Zahra, as she sat next to the grave of her father, everyone who had collected began to weep from the sound of her sigh. The crying of Sayyida Zahra is not a normal affair. It's not a normal affair. Why? There are some different narrations. Look how difficult it was. The people said that Zahra, after her father left this world, from her own words, she says, Baba, normally when a person leaves this world, every day after that, they remember them less and less. But Baba, I am the one who, after you have left this world, every day my missing you increases and increases, and my difficulty is harder and harder to be separated from you. They said Sayyida Zahra would sit in her house and cry. Day and night she would cry, and the people eventually became frustrated. They said, Ali, tell Fatima to either cry in the day or cry at the night, but her constant crying keeps us awake. We can't handle it. There are two reasons why some say that this was difficult for them to handle. One, they say, is that it was a political statement of Sayyida Zahra, that it was a material statement of Sayyida Zahra, that through her crying she was showing her displeasure, and they were frustrated at the displeasure that she showed, so they said keep her silent. The other one, which associates with her khilqat, which associates with her creation, is Sayyida Zahra was Hawra Insiyya, that she was the heavenly being that was put on this earth. The same way that her creation was not something that was average, so was her crying something that was not average. Her weeping was that weeping of a heavenly personality, that the sound of the weeping of Zahra took even the hardest of hearts to such a way that they could not sit and bear in patience, that how had they put such injustice against someone like Zahra. So they said, oh Ali, let her cry in the day or let her cry in the night. So Amir al-Mu'mineen said, Zahra, they refuse to let you cry. She says, what people are these? My father was the best of humanity, and now they stop me from weeping now that he has left me. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Zahra, I will make for you a house. He went out after Wadi Salam, and he went and he made a grave for her. After Baqi. And there was a small shack. And every day, Sayyida Zahra would take Imam Hassan from one hand, Imam Hussain from the other hand, go out past Baqi to this house, which was in the shade of a tree. And she would sit there and she would cry for her father because the people would not let her weep in her house. One day Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I went to go see Zahra. As I came to the house, Hassan and Hussein came to me. Their faces had become red from the sun. I went and I saw Zahra. She said, Ali, they are so disturbed by my weeping. They have even cut down the tree in whose shade I would sit and cry. Ali, tell them I am a guest, but only of a few days. I will leave this earth soon. Let me weep for my father while I am alive. In this way, the days of Sayyidah Zahra came too close to an end. And we see that one day, it is Amir al-Mu'mineen who says, I saw Zahra today. She did not need the assistance of Fidda to sit up. I saw that she was not as sick as she had been. I saw that she had been taken care of and she had been washing the children and preparing their food with her own hands. I said to her, Oh Zahra, I find that your condition today is better. She replied to me, Yes, O Ali, I want to prepare my affairs. Last night I saw in my dream my father came to me. He came to me and told me my time will be finished soon. I won't bear these difficulties much longer. I want to take care of my children with my own hands, Ali. They describe the preparation of Sayyidah Zahra. Such is a personality. You want to see success in this life. Asma says, one day I came to Zahra in these final days and I saw her. She was sitting very worried and frustrated. I said, Oh Sayyidah, oh my mistress, what has disturbed you? She says, Asma, I am thinking, when I will die, they will put me on the pier, on the wood, and they will carry me to my grave. Oh Asma, Fatima is one who has always protected her hijab, who has never violated her hijab, who has always been conscientious of how the people see her. I do not like that my body should be laid on the wood and people should be able to see my body as it goes to the grave. Sayyidah Zahra, you are not patient that when you leave this world, that one should see your body. How did you withstand when they struck your cheeks? How did you withstand when they struck you with a whip in the streets of Medina? Asma said, I said to my mistress that in other countries they have a tradition where they build a box around the body on the four sides so that you can't tell if there is a man or a woman inside of this pier that's being taken to the graveyard. Sayyidah Zahra said, show to me, Asma, what it is that you mean. She showed her an example. She says, I built an example and I raised the sides. She says, upon seeing this for the first time, I saw my mistress smile at me. And she said, oh Asma, you have protected the hijab of Zahra. May Allah give you success in dunya and akhirah. In this way, Sayyidah Zahra was the personality who prepared for her akhirah until even she mentioned, when I am deceased, I want you to bury this small vial with me. They said, what is in this vial? She says, in this I have preserved the tears that I cried to Allah in my prayers. I wish to present them before Allah on the day of judgment. It's true that Zahra took her tears to present to Allah, but there is another narration that says, on the day of judgment, when Sayyidah Zahra comes, first Allah will command all of the Anbiya to look away. Jibreel will turn to Rasulullah. Rasulullah, you should turn away as well. Rasulullah says, but Jibreel, this is my daughter Zahra. She is my daughter. She is a piece of me. There is no hurma for me to look at her. And Jibreel replies, Rasulullah, look away, because the condition in which Zahra comes to Allah today is difficult for you to bear. She comes with her arms bruised from the whip of Qunfud. She comes with her eye injured from the strike on her face. She comes with her martyred Muhsin, and she comes with the arms of Abbas as a wasila for the Shia of Ali Muhammad. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ عَلَى لَعْنَةِ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. يا الله بحق فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها وسر المستودع فيها. Oh Allah, accept this small ibadah from us. Oh Allah, hasten the reappearance of the son of Zahra. Oh Allah, make us from the upright supporters of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Oh Allah, there are those amongst our community, our families, our ummah, and the mu'mineen around the world who are sick. Give them shifa. There are those who have no aman. Give them aman. Oh Allah, there are those amongst us, our families and our communities and the ummah who have hajat that need to be fulfilled by the right of the mention of the daughter of Rasulullah, fulfill their hajat. رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.
Hussain. Fatima Zehra, Fatima Zehra, Fatima Zehra, Fatima Zehra, Ya Zehra, Ya Zehra, Ya Zehra, Ya Zehra, ए मेरी बीबी, ए मेरी बीबी, तेरे दर पे इस्तिगासा है, तेरा ममनून मेरी शहज़ादिए जहाँ सारा है, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, तू हमें हिफ्ज़ और अमान दे दे, अपनी चादर का साइबान दे दे, तेरी कुदरत में क्या नहीं बीबी, तुझी से चाहे दो जहां दे दे, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, ए मेरी बीबी, ए मेरी बीबी, आंसुओं ने दुआ मांगी है, तेरी तस्बीर के दिल ने तुझे पुकारा है, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, या ज़हरा, मोहम्मद वाले
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا نبي الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين الشهيد بكربلاء، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر الأهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا تسعة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، علي بن الحسين زين العابدين، ومحمد بن علي الباقر، وجعفر بن محمد الصادق، وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم، وعلي بن موسى الرضا، ومحمد بن علي الجواد، وعلي بن محمد الهادي، والحسن بن علي العسكري، وحجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك، وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك، وجعلنا من أعوانك والأنصارك والمستشهدين بين يديك. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. I don't know, I think I got
चल आई जा लगाओ नारा
नारा तेरे